Hi, and welcome to our online discussions. Before watching the video, I only have two simple requests for you. First is to get a paper or a notebook and jot down all the important ideas that you need to know. Second is to focus. Happy learning! So let's now proceed to the section 3 or the propaganda in La Solidaridad. So ang nakikita nyo sa picture na ito ay ang picture ng samahan ng propaganda. So prior to the arrival of Rizal in Spain, many Filipino students were already studying there like Pedro Paterno and Gregorio Santiago, who were both active Filipino nationalists. When Rizal arrived in Spain in 1882, there was an atmosphere of activism led mostly by students. Nung dumating si Rizal sa Spain, he actually felt the atmosphere of activism because of the students or the Filipinos who are already studying there. Pero, meron din siyang mga nadatnan doon ng mga Filipino na sa tingin ni Rizal ay hindi karapat-dapat na pumunta doon at mag-aral sa Spain. Kasi sinasamantala nila kung ano meron sila doon. Sabi ni Rizal, tuwing may sinabi ang historians na sinabi daw ni Rizal sa isang sulat niya na bakit sila yung ipinadala doon. Nagliliwaliw lamang sila sa hapon, pumupunta sa mga lugar na hindi dapat puntahan, sa mga bar, ganyan. Pero may isa ding historian na nagsabi na isang beses nakita si Rizal na nandoon sa lugar na pinupuntahan ng mga Pinoy. Around this time, Spain's government was in disarray because the newly adopted 1876 constitution created a power vacuum. So as political parties tried to consolidate their power and politicians tried to secure their personal agendas, shifting from one political bloc to another became common. So corruption was prevalent in the Spanish government. Furthermore, a series of government and cabinet reorganizations followed shortly after every change of party alignment. Ito yung naging discussion natin last week. Nagpabago-bago yung organization ng government kung kaya't mas lumago ang korupsyon. So nagpabago-bago, nagpapalit-palit ng nakaupo sa pwesto, kung kaya't mas naging magulo. In addition, many people in Spain were illiterate because of the lack of primary and secondary schools. So most importantly, the church was still a formidable force in almost every aspect of the Spanish society. So medyo nahirapan din si Jose Rizal kasi nga kahit nasa Spain sila, malakas pa rin yung puwersa ng control ng mga Espanyol. So this is the situation in Spain that Rizal witnessed when he arrived. So he was also welcomed in an atmosphere of liberalism, which exposed him to ideas formally foreign to him, na bago sa kanya. Kasi nga, sa Pilipinas, wala silang karapatan. Pero sa Spain, meron sila. Kung kaya't yung ibang mga Pilipino na nag-aaral sa Spain, masaya, natutuwa kasi nagagawa nila yung gusto nila na hindi nila nagagawa sa Pilipinas. This was when he became aware of the concept of assimilation, wherein the Philippines can be considered as a province of Spain and not just tributary colony. For Rizal, this meant that Filipinos could be equal with the Spaniards. Yung pagstay ni Rizal sa Spain at pagiging surrounded niya or pagiging aware niya sa konsepto ng liberalismo ang nagtulak sa kanya para mas mag-isip ng paraan paano ba kami makakaahon sa sitwasyon na kinakaharap namin sa Pilipinas. Dito nila naisipang buuin yung propaganda na naglalayon unang-una ng pagkakapantay-pantay ng Pilipinas at Espanyol at pangalawa, itong sinasabi niya na assimilation kung saan gagawing lalawigan ng Espanya ang Pilipinas. Di sana ngayon, mga Spanish na tayo. Isa din yun ay magkaroon ng kinatawan ng Pilipinas sa Kortes ng Espanya at sekularisyon ng mga parokya sa Pilipinas. Yung sekularisyon na yun ay yun yung isa sa mga pinaglalaban ng Gumbursa kung saan gusto nilang mapabalik ang authority ng Catholic Church sa mga paring sekular o paring mga Pilipino. At isa pa sa mga objective ng propaganda ay maipagkaloob sa mga Pilipino ang karapatang pantao at kalayaan sa pagsasalita. Shortly after arriving in Barcelona, Rizal started contributing to the short-lived bilingual newspaper, Zaryong Tagalog, together with Marcelo H. Del Pilar. Most of Rizal's contributions were focused on the idea of national regeneration through education. So dahil nga sa naranasan ni Jose Rizal na liberalismo sa iba't ibang bansa, at saka gustuhan din niya na makaalpas ang Pilipinas, ang naging advocacy at paniniwala niya ay ang edukasyon ang makakatulong sa pag-aahon ng Pilipinas. hindi siya naniniwala sa idea ng revolusyon, pero naniniwala siya na kaya niyang lumaban sa pamamagitan lamang ng pagsulat at ng kanyang edukasyon. So, for him, kapag may alam ka, kapag edukado ka, hindi ka malilinlang. So likewise, Rizal also contributed to other publications led by Graciano Lopez Haina. So nakikita niyo sa picture ay si Marcelo H. Del Pilar, yung may bigote, at si Graciano Lopez Haina yung nakaupo. So Haina was the first to lead a series of protests in writing against the injustice of the Spaniards in the Philippines in the newspaper Los Dos Mundos. Later on, Rizal found himself writing side by side with Haina's criticisms against the Spanish colonial regime. Si Haina at si Del Pilar ay nakatulong din talaga para mapag-alab lalo yung kagustuhan ni Rizal na maipagtanggol yung Pilipinas. In 1883, Rizal's resentment against the Spaniard intensified when he received a letter from his brother Pasiano. So the letter informed him about the new Calamba priest, Father Villafranca, who was threatening their father and demanding for advance rental payments. From that moment, mas lalong nag-alab yung galit ni Rizal sa mga Espanyol dahil sa ginagawa nila sa mga tao sa Pilipinas, lalo na sa kanyang ama. In 1884, Haina and Rizal delivered speeches at the Exposition de Bellas Artes in Madrid, where 2 Filipino painters were given recognition. So dito, natuwa si Rizal, natuwa sila kasi napatunayan nila na ang Pilipino ay kayang makipagsabayan sa ibang bansa. At doon, nanalo si Juan Luna ng award, kung hindi ako nagkakamali, nag-champion si Juan Luna dahil sa kanyang painting na Spoliarium. And Felix Resurrection Hidalgo won 3rd place for his Virgenes Cristianas Expuestas al Populacho or Populaco. In their speeches, Haina condemned the abuses of the friars and the Spanish colonial government in the Philippines, whereas Rizal encouraged the Filipino youth to follow the footsteps of Luna and Hidalgo. Yan, nagbigay ng speech si Haina at nagbigay din ng speech si Rizal. Pero yung speech ni Rizal, nakatanggap ng iba't ibang interpretation, both from Spain and the Philippines. So, doon sa Spain, doon sa mga Espanyol na nasa Spain, okay sa kanila na magkaroon ng pagkakapantay-pantay. Pero may ilan pa rin na nagmasama at yung speech na ito ni Rizal ay nakarating pa sa Pilipinas. At doon, kinonsider ng mga Espanyol yung kanyang speech as seditious or naghahamon ng isang revolusyon. So many believe that Rizal could never return to the Philippines again as long as it was a colony of Spain. So yung pamilya ni Rizal ay lalong natakot sa kalagayan ni Rizal. Yung mga paint na nakikita nyo ngayon sa screen nyo are the award-winning or the international award-winning paints na pinaint ni Juan Luna at ni Felix Resurrection Hidalgo. So yun nasa taas, ito nasa left, ay ang Spoliarium na pinaint ni Juan Luna at yung nasa baba naman ay ang Virgenes Cristianas Expuestas al Populaco or al Populacho na pininta ni Felix Resurrection Hidalgo. Itong Spoliarium ay matatagpuan sa Museum of Fine Arts. Kung makakagawi kayo sa Manila, libreng pumasok sa Museum of Fine Arts at makikita nyo yan, napakalaki, napakaganda. At ito namang pininta ni Felix Resurrection ay makikita sa Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. So, it was in 1885 that Rizal became more active in contributing to various newspapers. So, in 1888, Rizal joined an organization composed of Filipino liberals exiled in Spain, de la Solidaridad. The organization aimed to raise the awareness of Spain on the needs of its colony, the Philippines. So, katulad pa rin ng hinahangad ni Rizal, ang objective pa rin nila ay ang maging aware ang Spain sa mga pangangailangan nila. So, Galicano Apacible, Rizal's cousin, issued a newspaper of the same name. It was published in Barcelona. So, Haina and later on Del Pilar edited the newspaper while Rizal was an active and significant contributor. So, it served as the principal organ of the reform movement. So, ang ginamit pa rin nilang panlaban sa mga Espanyol ay ang kanilang mga panulat. So, most of the articles featured in La Solidaridad talked about the possibility of the Philippines becoming a province of Spain with equal rights before the law and recognition of the freedom of speech and assembly. So, ang gusto pa rin ng La Solidaridad, inaakala ni Rizal or nang bumubuo ng La Solidaridad noong panahon na yon, na kapag naging probinsya tayo ng Spain, ay magkakaroon tayo ng equal rights. So, ano gusto nyo? Maging probinsya ng Spain or maging probinsya ng China? Char. One of Rizal's most important contributions was the letter to the young women of Malolos, published on February 22, 1889. So it recognized the efforts of and bravery of 20 women from Malolos who wrote a petition letter to Governor General Valeriano Weyler to allow them to put up a night school where they could study the Spanish language under the tutelage of Teodoro Sandico. Though the petition was initially denied because of the pressures and influence of the friars, the perseverance of the women of Malolos prevailed. So Jose Rizal also made a fearless forecast on the future of the Philippines within 100 years in his work, The Philippines, a Century Hence. It analyzes the various causes of the misery suffered by the Filipino people under the Spanish colonizers. So in connection to this, Rizal wrote another essay published in La Solidaridad in Madrid in 1890 entitled The Indolence of the Filipino as a response to the accusations of the Spaniards that the Filipinos were indolent. So, hindi talaga tumigil si Rizal sa pagsusulat at sa pagtatanggol sa Pilipinas. Ano? May accusation ang Spaniards na tamad daw ang mga Pilipino. Pero, sumagot si Rizal sa pamamagitan ng pag-publish ng essay sa La Solidaridad at pinagtatanggol niya na hindi daw tamad ang mga Pilipino. So, Rizal argued that several factors can be identified for such and most can be rooted in the abuses committed by the Spaniards directed to the Filipinos. So Jose Rizal's outstanding talent and passion for writing, as evidenced by his numerous works, greatly antagonized the friars who were the usual target of his criticism. After Haina quit writing for the group, Del Pilar assumed leadership. So there were stories that Rizal was offered the position of editor but rejected it as he thought it might create a rift between the two propagandistas. Soon Rizal stopped writing for the newspaper to dedicate his time in addressing the Calamba agrarian dispute that was further fueled by the eviction of the Mercado family from the Dominican lands. We are now proceeding to lesson 4 of week 3, In the Eyes of Noli. So in 1876, Jose Rizal initially took up philosophy at the University of Santo Tomas, but heeding the advice of the Jesuit friends, Rizal opted to take medicine instead in 878, which he was not able to complete. Pinili niyang mag-take ng medicine kasi gusto din niyang ma-address yung nabubulag na mata ng kanyang ina. So in 1882, Rizal left the Philippines to go to Spain because of a secret mission attested by a deal between him and his older brother, Pasiano Mercado. Ito yung napag-usapan nila na mag-aaral si Rizal sa Spain para maging isa sa mga magtatanggol sa Pilipinas. The highlight of the deal between the two brothers was that on one hand, the young Rizal would have to observe life overseas and prepare himself to liberate the Filipino people from the tyrannical abuse of the Spaniards. On the other hand, Pasiano Mercado would take the responsibility of looking after the family in the Philippines and finance Rizal's studies overseas. The mission was even kept from his parents. So after finishing his medical studies in 1885 at the Universidad Central de Madrid, Rizal was able to finish the manuscript of Noli Me Tangere in 1887. So to keep up with the very expensive publication cost, Rizal had to remove some chapters of the novel to reduce the number of pages. Humarap si Rizal sa matinding anxiety or depression. Kasi hindi na niya alam kung anong gagawin niya. Dumating sa puntong gusto na ni Rizal sunugin yung buong script ng Noli Me Tangere kasi nga wala siyang pera. Wala siyang pera para ma-publish yung book na yon. And sabi ng ibang historians, meron daw dun sa libro or sa last part ng libro, yung ibang pages nung book ay may sulat na sa likod. Kasi nga, nagtitipid na si Rizal sa page. Tapos yun, marami pa daw si Rizal na tinanggal na chapter dun sa novel para lang mapagkasya yung pera niya para sa pagpapublish ng book na ito. So, with the help of some friends in Madrid, so yan, the loan offer of Maximo Viola and portions of his allowance sent by his brother Pasiano, Rizal was able to print 2,000 copies of the novel in Berlin. So he sent some of the copies to his friends in Madrid, to Ferdinand Blumentritt na kaibigan niya, and to the Philippines wherein the Archbishop of Manila immediately denounced it as heretical, impious, and scandalous. So sinasabi nila na ungodly daw at scandalous yung Noli Me Tangere dahil sa content nito. The story of how Noli Me Tangere was distributed in the Philippines amid the strict censorship implemented by the Spaniards can be attributed to the efforts of Jose Maria Basa, or what they call the Hero Smuggler of the propaganda movement. So siya yung naging koneksyon. Paano na ipadala ang Noli Me Tangere sa Pilipinas nang hindi nabubuko ng mga Espanyol. So through his connections and thriving business, he was able to arrange Hong Kong-Manila trips for Filipinos, which became the way for subversive and anti-friar pamphlets to reach the hands of the Filipinos. So siya yung nag-fund para maipadala yung Noli Me Tangere sa Pilipinas. So, yan, one of the books he sent was Noli Me Tangere. So, according to reports, the Filipino travelers who serve as couriers were instructed to disembark the ships without the books, which were usually hidden in a coal bin of the ship. So, tinatago nila. They would then hire a karetela, and the books were usually placed inside buri sacks sa loob ng karetela. So, afterwards, they would pretend to forget something in the ship. So, mga artista, mga dating Pilipino. After some time, the cochero would inspect the buri sacks and find the books. He would either dispose or leave them, and another arranged carretela would pick up the sacks for Filipinos to freely get copies, thus disseminating them to the people. So, ganun yung naging pamimigay nila sa Noli Me Tangere. At kung isipin natin, matalino sila sa part na yun at matapang din kasi nga, hindi pa uso ang Facebook Messenger para magka-communicate kayo ng ayos, naipadala pa rin nila yung mga libro at mga nobela sa mga Pilipino. Question. So, do you think the Filipinos were really able to read Noli Me Tangere even if it's written in Spanish language? So, the role of Noli Me Tangere in the development of Filipino consciousness can never be discounted. However, its significance in the 21st century has greatly diminished considering that the Philippines is no longer a colony and has long been an independent nation. Nevertheless, many of the points raised by Rizal in Noli Me Tangere remain relevant today, especially with the current threats to Philippine sovereignty. So that's it for lesson 3. Hopefully we are clear on the discussion that we have. So goodbye, God bless you, and ingat!